Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. Oh, I'm going to get a visit after this one by a few folks, I'm sure, because today we are talking policing, and we're talking particularly policing in Alberta. It's no secret that Danielle Smith and the UCP have made it very, very clear that they would very much like to have their own police force that they can direct and choose enforcement options for, which is in no way chilling. But there are a lot of people who are making the argument that, you know what, the RCMP has been doing a great job, particularly in rural Alberta, given the circumstances, and maybe we shouldn't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater just yet. To have this conversation today, I am very excited to welcome to the program two members of the National Police Federation, both of whom are still serving police officers, Jeff McGowan and Kevin Halwa. Welcome to the breakdown.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks
Thank
for having us.
thank you very much.
So before we get into the not at all complex conversation around policing, if I could just ask each of you, and I'll start with Jeff, if you could just explain a little bit about who you are and why we're having this conversation today.
Sure. My name is Jeff McGowan. I'm currently serving member of the Mounted Police. I joined the force in 1994 out of Nova Scotia. Ended up in French training, living with a French family in Quebec for 6 months, then off to depot. From depot, ended up in northern Alberta. Would have been better had I, been taught maybe Cree because that was the the more common language up there, but ended up there nonetheless. Spent 5 years in Slave Lake. Great spot, great posting. After that, ended up taking a transfer to the Yukon. Went to Watson Lake, just over the border in the Yukon. Kind of worked or policed northern BC, Yukon, as well as parts of the territories, and then into Whitehorse. Went into Whitehorse, would have been 2003-ish, and was on the watch there for a bit. Ended up in the general investigations section. Also got on the emergency response team up there. It was part-time at that point. Took a transfer in 2007 back to Alberta, ended up in a federal drug section for 2 years, back on the emergency response team here. From there, ended up with the alert on the gang unit, so working on a joint forces operation with Edmonton City Police. Great time, love working with those guys. From there, ended up full-time with the emergency response team for about 3-4 years-ish. Left that as a full-time sniper. It was a good gig, but eventually you have to recognize when your shelf life is done. Decided to move on. Ended up so that would have been about 20 years. At about that point, moved over more into the administrative, HR, kind of labor relations side of it. It was kind of a hodgepodge, and then from there, that would have been about 2015-ish. Ended up with the National Police Federation when the union finally was stood up. Would have been, I think, 2019 when it was certified. First board of directors was 2020. Got voted in there, and I've been there ever since.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Well, similar story. Not quite as much service as Jeff, but I joined the Mounties in '97. Proudly served in Grand Prairie, and after which I moved up to Fort Vermilion, which at the time I thought was the end of the earth. But I tell you, I loved every minute of it. Really enjoyed policing and working that sort of country up there. Moved down to Central Alberta in 2004, thinking, well, this will be home for another few years, and then off to another venture. Still live in Central Alberta. I've transferred around to the area a little bit, but still make my home in Central Alberta, and happy to do so. All my service in the Mounties have been in uniform. Pretty happy about that. So not quite as focused as Jeff as as ERT and that kind of good stuff. But all my service been in Alberta, all my service in uniform. Proud to do it, and I should say, despite some of the political conversations that are going on in the province right now, I'm still darn proud to be an Albertan. My family came to Alberta, settled in Alberta in 1898, long before the province was a province. I'm a fifth generation Albertan myself, pretty darn proud of it. And yeah, so I'm not sure if you can find much more Albertan than me. So we'll just leave it there.
All right. I want to. This is going to be such. It's a complicated conversation to have. Anytime there's a conversation around policing, period, it is a difficult conversation in a lot of different ways to access and have, because more often than not, police are not known for their victories.
Mm.
They're known for the not victories. Um, and one of the things that I think is poorly handled in the conversation, in the public conversation around policing and policing issues, is the recognition of the fact that it's not the victories that people talk about with police
Yeah.
officers and policing. It is the unfortunate choices that are made by people who maybe shouldn't have made those choices. So I just want to put that into the ether
Yeah.
to start the conversation, because I know that there's going to be a lot of people that are going like, breakdown, why are you having cops on?
Yeah, Nick, you hit the nail right on the head there. And a lot of the negative publicity that comes out in the media, it's all about the negatives. And then Jeff and I have both said many times before, in policing, the failures are extremely public. The successes are extremely private, and that's unfortunate because our members, not just our members, of the Mounted Police, but all police officers across the country are doing great work. They are the really the last line of defense between chaos and civilized society. And the vast majority of Canadians don't understand that that's what's going on because they do such a great job. And in Alberta here, for example, or specifically, Albertans value and support their RCMP members. And and sometimes this current government proposal to replace with the provincial police service is it's costly, unwanted, unnecessary, and rightfully so. With the more that people get educated, the more people are saying, well, hang on a second, is this really what's needed?
Well, it's a fairly accurate statement because we use this often. Um, I think policing within Canada, and this is not just limited to the Mounted Police, it's policing across the country. We've done an excellent job of shielding middle class Canada from the realities of policing in Canada. They don't understand a lot of how things are done, the way things work, and the fact that people would actually be uncooperative, to say the least,
Hmm.
with police. To Kevin's point, when we're talking about public versus private, so when you look at policing within Canada, I quote this number to a lot of people. We've got roughly about 70,000 sworn police officers within Canada. There's 41 million people. As far as police and public contacts go, and again, just looking at across the country, it's probably, I don't know, is it like 7 million, 10 million? I know for the Mounties, it's just under 3 million. All of a sudden, you see tons of, especially media stories, the bad, officer get charged or use of force or something, all of these things. But you're missing a whole wide swath of police and public contacts that don't obviously result in that. We have, the majority of people are doing a fantastic job. And I would probably say about 98 to 99% are doing a fantastic job. It's a small percentage that garners the interest of generally media and other groups because, well, that's kind of what sells these days.
Yeah, I love the way that you said the shielding of Canadians from the realities of things, because even in my profession as a paramedic, speaking only for myself, it is one of the common themes in conversations is there's so many people who just don't know what real life can actually look like.
Yeah.
And there's in any given profession, you're going to have a spectrum of individuals who function to varying degrees of effectiveness, and there will be, like I'm sure in Tim Hortons, there's some people who just crush working at Tim Hortons, and then there's those people that everybody's like, oh, it's that guy. That exists in any profession, whether we're talking about Tim Hortons, paramedicine, or policing. And by nature of the amount of power, I think that police officers have, when mistakes get made, or when that guy does that guy things, the consequences are so much more dire than a mixed up double double that they tend to get a lot more attention. So I didn't want to jump into the conversation that we're going to have today without acknowledging that chunk of nuance, because I think it's so important. And that's what I'll have to say about that. But you talked a little bit, sorry, Kevin, you talked a little bit about the reason why we're here. And it has to do entirely with the proposed Alberta Provincial Police Force. In order to have that conversation, though, I'd like to kind of flesh out some of the realities of the situation. So right now, we're in areas where the RCMP are providing the policing services. One of you, and you can arm wrestle over it, can one of you explain what the current situation is, and sort of what are the broad operating rules for that current situation?
Well, so within Alberta, we have obviously the RCMP, and we also have municipal police forces, and then there's different band police, like First Nations policing and so on. So the way it works with the RCMP and the way the contracts are set up, you have the federal component, and that generally will deal with national security stuff or federal drugs or, the border, for example. Then you're also going to have within Alberta the provincial policing contract. So those communities, let's say like your Red Earth Creek or your, I don't know, I think Desmarais would fall under there. Any of your smaller kind of areas that don't meet the threshold for a municipal contract, get provincially funded police officers. And then you have your municipal contract. So that would be like your St. Alberts, your Red Deers, your Cochranes, your Airdries, some of those larger spots. And there's different funding methods when it comes down to these areas. And it's incredible. It's so incredibly complicated, and I'm not sure if it really needs to be, but for whatever reason, it's a byproduct of Canadian society and bureaucracy. We make things overly complicated. But the way it works is there's different funding models. So if you have a municipal contract, for example, St. Albert we'll use, or Leduc or what have you. So 90% of that contract is going to be covered by the municipality, and 10% is funded by the federal government. So it's a benefit to having, just on a purely financial level, benefit to having the mounted police. When you're looking at any of the areas within the provincial policing agreement, you have 30% is covered by the federal government, and the remaining 70% is then covered by the province. So it's automatically a pretty fair deal. And as far as the federally funded positions go, obviously that's straight up Fed funded. So it's kind of broken down in that fashion.
And to make matters a little bit more complicated, some of those locations, let's take Grand Prairie, for example. Grand Prairie might be a poor example because they're going through a transition. But prior to the transition,
Slave would be good.
Yeah, some of those locations will have both a municipal contract and a rural component in this working in the same detachment. So it gets complicated, but I guess the point of, from a financial standpoint is, regardless if we're talking straight municipal contract or straight provincial rural contract, the federal government picks up a portion of the tab.
And
it's costing.
And even in some of those spots, like, and again, I'll use Slave Lake just because I was there, it was called an FNP position, which was a First Nations position that was, again, wholly funded by the federal government. So you've got municipal, provincial, and then a federally funded, an FNP position, policing in a certain area. So it's all, everybody's doing the same job, more or less, but you're looking at different funding streams for all this stuff. So it comes as a benefit to generally the Alberta taxpayer.
When it comes to the priorities, of the RCMP under the current policing structure.
Yep.
My understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, is you have that federal side, so they're the ones who are doing all of the federal stuffs. And by federal stuffs, the terrorism stuff that you were talking about, the national security stuff, that's sort of their sandbox. Then when you move into the municipal or the provincial stuffs, they're primarily to serve the communities that they're in. So like would it be correct to say that in Alberta the RCMP has two um, different functions. One of them is one that serves the federal, that is by my
Yep.
understanding the smaller section for sure, and then there is the RCMP that serves the people of Alberta.
100%. The and you talked briefly about priorities. The and it's one of those things that is often misunderstood by proponents of a provincial police service, is they don't really understand where the priorities come from. But in the provincial policing contract, it's Article 5 of the contract. Article 5 of that provincial policing services agreement clearly says that sorry, Article 6, I take that back, says that the policing priorities are set by the provincial minister, currently Mike Ellis. So there really is sometimes a misunderstanding when we have these conversations with people that either don't know any better or haven't done any research themselves. They heard something on Facebook and they ran with it. They don't understand how the contract works, but the contract is 100% very clear provincially that those policing priorities come from the provincial minister, period. Similarly, on the municipal contracts, like the Red Deers, the Ledukes, the St. Alberts, the Shore Parks of the world, their municipal contract very, very similar. That there was those policing priorities come from the municipality. So any suggestion that the Mounties only report to Ottawa, and we don't get any say in what they're doing because they're they're with the feds and it's reported to by Ottawa is just it's just malarkey. It's just not true. Yeah.
The so there's certainly not any clear line of delineation between the operational sides of Fed, provincial, municipal, or whatever. I mean, we've seen it, and especially the nature of the world now, it's incredibly small. Everybody's operating, everything touches on everything else. So you're always going to have, if let's say Fed dope, like the federal drug section is working, I don't know, some sort of importation project or something, it's going to have real world implications on the streets here in Alberta. But you're also going to be working in conjunction with some of your municipal drug sections, for example, or your municipal drug general investigation sections, because it's everybody pulling in the same direction to deal with whatever crime is occurring. So there's a lot of this stuff. It's very, and this is where I think a lot of the confusion lies. And I think part of the issue when it comes to certain provinces suggesting or looking at potentially creating a provincial police force, again, the RCMP has done a good job of hiding the true costs of all of this, because if you're dealing with, let's say, human source witness protection, that kind of stuff, that is generally a federally administered and run program. But the provincial side, as well as the muni side, will end up using a lot of those resources. So the same holds true when you're looking at any of the analyst stuff. It's true when you're looking at emergency response team, dogs, aircraft, whatever the case may be. All of it touches on everything else. There isn't any secure border, as it were, between all of these areas.
Thank you for that, because I think that having a foundational understanding of what we're talking about is really, really important, because we certainly have seen certain maybe bad faith actors in the conversation trying to say that the RCMP take all of their orders from
Mhm.
Ottawa, and we can't control them, and we need a provincial police force that we can control. I get a little squirrely anytime any government says we would like a policing branch that is completely under our control, because historically there's some precedents that go along with that aren't great for the average person. Um, a lot of this conversation seems to be predicated on two main points. The first one is the who gets the command and control of the police officers. The other one seems to be predicated on a narrative that the federal government wants to get out of providing policing to the provinces. I love how you lean forward for that one, Jeff. Let's address that. To your knowledge, to your understanding, what are the actual facts around whether or not the federal government wants to mandate that the RCMP no longer provide contract policing to provinces or municipalities?
Not accurate at all. There is no other way to put that. As a matter of fact, we have a copy of the previous Justice or Public Safety Minister, Dominic LeBlanc, that was sent out to all the respective provincial justice or public safety ministers, stating that we're gearing up for renegotiations. We're looking at continuing the contract. They have it in writing. That letter we have not seen that come from the current government. There's a new public safety minister in there, but it has been told to all the public safety ministers in the provinces that they are continuing. And in point of fact, because I have the article up here, BC has essentially said they're not going to create any provincial police force. They are gearing up for and have confirmation with the federal government that they're going to continue. So it seems unlikely that one province would avail themselves of an opportunity to have the RCMP serve as their provincial police force, and then the federal government say, okay, we're going to get out of all of it. It is not true. It is wish thinking, and it's a foil for groups that want to push a certain narrative. None of it is accurate. None of it.
Yeah, yeah, Jeff's right. The former federal public safety manager sent a letter to all the premiers in the country, basically reassuring that, hey, RCMP is not getting out of contract policing. We're here to say, but recently the current federal public safety minister, also in Senate Committee on National Safety, basically reiterated the same thing, that we're ready to start renegotiating the contract that expires in 2032, and we're going to be here.
Yeah.
The commissioner has sent letters to the premier of Alberta, reassuring the same thing. But for some reason, we're still charging down this road and sometimes there's a narrative from from under the dome there that says, the federal government is signaling, is the term that somebody often uses, that there's an intention to get out of contract policing, where I suggest that the signals are all completely opposite to that. We've got on paper, not going anywhere, renegotiating, and the current public safety minister is saying, hey, listen, we're ready to negotiate and we fully intend to be here. But yet sometimes, if I guess, it almost seems like if it doesn't fit a narrative, then it doesn't get paid attention to.
Yeah. And it's an unfortunate thing, because I think that there's something, it's hard to quantify. I think you just know it or you don't. But there's something to be said about having a national police force. It speaks to national security. And even after any of like the Mass Casualty Commission or inquiries where they're talking about national policing standards and the effectiveness of having interoperability and economy of scale, the direction and the push is to move towards that limited number of police forces. If you look at the United States, for example, has, I don't know, I want to say 18,000 to 20,000 different police forces all across the country, different jurisdictions, different standards, whereas Canada, I think we're running what, less than 200, 180, something like that. It's an important thing. And I think when you're looking at issues, so we've done lots and lots of polling within the province, and we've done it with various other provinces as well. But here in Alberta, we're probably on the eighth round of polling, and it has remained consistent. People are happy with the RCMP. This is not an issue that needs to be addressed at this point. And quite frankly, Alberta has other problems that we should really be looking at as opposed to something like this. And in the event that we're going to be renegotiating a contract, to me, it makes more sense that, okay, the contracting partner, the province, if you have identified issues or things you'd like to see changed, enter into negotiations. You want to change how some things are run? Well, this is the opportunity. You want to look at making improvements? Then this is the opportunity. That to me is a far more effective use of resources because we never we would never claim to be perfect. Nothing is, nothing, everything can always be improved. And I think earlier your comment, throwing baby out with the bathwater, if we want to actually improve public safety, and if our motivation is truly, a noble one and improving public safety while keeping in mind taxpayer dollars, et cetera, then it makes more sense to start looking at different aspects of the contract. What do we want to change? Is there certain things we want to change? Do we want to, increase, coverage here? Do we want to reduce stuff over there? Whatever the case may be. So, yeah, it's infuriating to listen to that stuff, especially where it takes advantage of the general public not necessarily understanding how any of this stuff works.
What, to your knowledge, was the source of that narrative? There's been conversations around a white paper of some kind that at some point said, "Oh, we're going to stop doing the contract policing," and there's regular. I'm just loving watching you get fired up for this, Jeff. There's that is a line that's, well, the federal government produced this white paper. They said they were going to get out of policing. Can I ask each of you to address that to the best of your knowledge and the best of your abilities?
The white paper, as provided by Justin Trudeau on his way out the door, that's the one you're likely referring to?
I believe so. It's
Yeah.
hard to tell because sometimes the people who are invoking it are not entirely specific about what they're speaking, almost as if that's advantageous to their position. But I might
Yeah.
be editorializing there.
Probably.
Yeah. It was something that Justin Trudeau, I think it was like 9 pages that glossed over a bunch of motherhood statements. It doesn't actually really provide a lot of detail. It doesn't, again, give any credence to any of the national security issues. It certainly doesn't. It was done independent of contacting or speaking with the RCMP. And again, it's a fundamental lack of understanding on what it is the RCMP does. So when I look at this, again, outgoing prime minister, and ironically enough, I think someone who was widely disliked, especially at the end, and particularly with this province, the idea that you would hold out something from this person that never seemed to be engaging in anything more than announcements and certainly never following through on anything, that you would hold them that, oh, look, see, he wanted to do this. It's not like he had 10 years or something to, make any of this happen. It was just kind of a throwaway, table drop, mic drop, whatever you want to call it, on your way out the door. That is not the sentiment we're getting. And I don't believe, just in anecdotally from conversations with any of the superiors within Ottawa that speak to the government regularly, that it was anything that was held by the current administration, as it were.
Yeah, yeah, Jeff's right. It's a paper written by somebody or released by somebody that basically the day before he got fired and left office. That somehow that then becomes a voice of an actual factual document. No, I mean it's musings of somebody that was leaving. Kind of not unlike somebody's ex-spouse mouthing off
Mhm.
about their ex-partner. despite the fact that the people that are now in charge of saying like, no, we're ready to renegotiate the contract. We're here to stay. Yet we still are seem grasping onto this paper that was written by somebody that now has no authority whatsoever. So it's a little bit mind-boggling that we would keep grasping onto this white paper as the smoking gun, that the feds would want to get into contract policing when it's you know irrelevant paper written by somebody who is now irrelevant. So
Yeah.
it's
And
interesting.
even, yeah, it is. And even when you're speaking with any American law enforcement, especially when you start looking at some of the higher ups or the people that have been around for a while, one of the things that I always try to ask, and I think we had somebody who was from uh, Morgan's buddy
Secret
there,
Service. Yeah.
Secret Service came in,
Yeah.
and we were asking him, what is it that you admire about policing within Canada, within that? And his biggest thing was the way that the Mounted Police is set up across the country with the federal and quite honestly the world, because we're in the embassies. But the way that you have a constant feeder stream, if you look at, let's say, the FBI, so it's always touted, oh, there'll be the FBI of the North, FBI of the North, and all this other kind of stuff. The FBI itself generally doesn't take new recruits to be special agents. That's not the path that works. Generally, you're, 5, 10 years, whatever it is, working in another police department in some fashion, and then you move to the FBI. We have that already in stream. So with the way the RCMP works, it goes from Civvy Street into depot, generally into contract, where you learn how to be a cop. You learn how to talk to people, you learn how to run a file, you learn how to interview, how to arrest people, how to deal with dangerous situations, think on the fly. And then from there, after getting those uh, those skills, you then make your move into the federal side where the investigations become more long-term, more complex, and potentially involving the national interest. So they've already, we have done what it is that the Americans would like to do, and now we're going to go backwards in it. That doesn't, to me, it doesn't make any sense.
I think fundamentally, there's probably the justification that would be offered is what you just offered or put forward as an argument for what are in the best interests of Canada.
Mm.
And I think that the counterpoint, agree or disagree, I disagree, would be what we're trying to do what's in the best interest of Alberta, with a blind eye to the advantages that having that national infrastructure provide to Alberta. Because like it's not that, and that's one of the wild things about the conversation to me is it's always like the predicate of the argument seems to be Alberta just gives everything and we're losing everything. But the reality is that Alberta does benefit from having that national policing network as well in all sorts of ways that we occasionally hear about and usually don't. So
Yeah.
It's those two things, though, Canada's interests and Alberta's interests are not mutually exclusive.
they
And
shouldn't be.
that's no, and they're not. And I think it really narrows the focus. And I think I mean, what are we looking at right now? We're looking at, the existential threat from the US and the 51st state and the annexation of Canada and elbows up and all this other stuff. There is something that speaks to national unity, but much like any family, we're always going to disagree on how we get to certain areas. But I think fundamentally, Canadians, Albertans, they're the same, have an interest in a strong Canada. Because when Canada's strong, Alberta's strong. If we look at, um, I guess, kind of that narrow, it's more isolationist view that doesn't end up serving Albertans, I believe, in the long run, because the world is too big for that now. It's not how things work.
Yeah, and some of the people that we've talked to that are on the opposing side of the argument, um, um, when you talk to them, it almost seems like they're not they're more um, hatred of Ottawa that is really driving them than opposed to anything else. Like for example, we were at a convention. I was at a convention, political convention from the UCP government, at an AGM, actually, what it was, a couple of years ago, and fella came up and talked to me, and he said, like, I'm gonna be completely honest with you, like I got nothing against the men and women of the RCMP. They're all great people, all kind of good stuff. But I have a problem with that right there. And he was pointing at the C in the RCMP. And I said, well, I asked him to explain a little bit. He says, well, it's because it's Canada, not Alberta. And I said, okay, so hang on a second. So you're suggesting to me that if we changed the name from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to Royal Uniform or Unicorn Mounted Police, you'd be okay with that? And he said, yeah, absolutely. That would be 100% fine with me. Which, just kind of boggles your mind, is that like that's like we're so against Canada as a nation that this is the kind of thought pattern that some of these folks on the opposite side of the argument have, that it's like it's tough to rationalize some of those conversations. It's just crazy.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would make the argument that when we're talking about policy issues and policy decisions that have the weight and consequence of the questions of policing, and
Mhm.
I refer back to the little preamble that I felt the need to do at the beginning of this conversation, that if we're making the decisions about what we should do based purely on an emotional place, and
Mhm.
not one that's based on evidence or record
Mhm.
we are setting ourselves up for catastrophic failure.
Yeah.
And I would make the argument we're setting up some of the most vulnerable people in Alberta for catastrophic failure. That would be my thoughts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I guess
100%.
you have to ask yourself what it is you would be looking to achieve by having a separate police. You're not going to suddenly make stealing, legal, or like the laws are the laws, and the policing, irrespective of Calgary City Police, RCMP, Medicine Hat, Calgary, or Edmonton, you're still operating under the provincial legislations as well as the the criminal code or any other like the any other federal act. You're still subject to them, and these are all things that are independent of should be independent of any sort of political influence. And you have to have faith that the police officers are going to be operating in good faith, regardless of whether or not it's Alberta Provincial Police or RCMP. We're still, our motivation is to follow the law, enforce the law, keep the peace. And just as far as the Alberta, Canadian versus Albertan side of it, the RCMP members that are currently posted living in Alberta are Albertans. We obviously want what's best for Alberta. And, Kevin and I, and I'm sure lots of other people have had lots of conversations with respect to the last 10 years under the Liberal government. I myself have not been a fan. I'm not a fan of their policies, etc., and so on. So that should be fairly clear. And I would probably argue that most of the police are not, because we are interested in public safety, the justice system, and so on. So we've seen what's happened with those ramifications. But do I want to suddenly break off and go our own way and have the Republic of Alberta? And no, I mean, are we going to see a shift? Maybe. I expect we will, because obviously this last experiment has not been well received, I guess is the best way to put it. So, yeah, it's nuts.
I just find it, and going back to your earlier point, I find it wildly entertaining that Danielle Smith, the UCP, and I am neither a Trudeau nor a Katy Perry fan, for the record, but I find it wild that Danielle Smith and the UCP have gone to such incredible lengths to separate themselves and distance themselves, and to say all of Justin Trudeau's policies are absolutely bad and we hate everything about Justin Trudeau. But there's this one thing that serves our agenda,
Yeah.
and we're going to cling to it like it's a life raft or a door, and we just got off the Titanic. Like it's it's bonkers to me that that is the if everything that Justin Trudeau said is wrong, and I mean reasonable people can disagree about
Yep.
particulars.
Policy.
I don't want to
Yeah.
go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But if you are of the mindset that all of the major policy initiatives that the Justin Trudeau government initiated are bad, why would you cling to this thing
Yeah.
when all directions are? Yeah, that's not actually like that was like writing on a napkin. I think I might have a bagel for breakfast today. Like
Yeah.
that doesn't
Yeah.
mean it's going to happen, and maybe you're not the person making breakfast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you know what? That's an excellent point. And I think realistically, and I've maintained this, and I've commented before that this is this agenda, this push for this, creating sheriffs and increasing them and looking at creating a different police force. The burden of proof rests with the person making the claim. So if it is truly the right way and it's going to improve public safety, save tax dollars, et cetera, all these other wonderful things, make the case for it. I haven't
Hmm.
seen anybody appear on, any good, news agencies. I look at Alberta Primetime. I mean, Kevin's been on there a number of times. I would like to see somebody from the government then get out and make the case and withstand those questions, because your idea is only as good as the scrutiny it can take, right? I
Yep.
mean, you need to be able to see that. So without any of that other kind of pushback, I'm just at a loss. I'm just at a loss.
Yeah, and sometimes Jeff's talking about, make the case. Sometimes there's certain people from the provincial government that will say, well, like we're hearing from, our these constituents that, like that, we want to change and the police aren't there and they're not happy, all that kind of stuff. Where the facts of the matter are is that that's just not true. Like we mentioned at the beginning, 7 or 8 rounds of polling, and the numbers in supporting the RCMP has remained relatively the same, in that, over 80% of Albertans in the rural area and areas served by the RCMP are quite happy and want to keep the RCMP. If if it was the contrary, you would there would be a stat there somewhere floating around based on real facts and evidence, but the fact of the matter is that there just isn't. I'm happy to stand corrected if somebody can show me a legitimate polling that says a different stat. Happy to see it and review it and have a conversation about it. But to throw things out there saying that my constituents aren't happy. Well, really, because that's not what we're hearing. And if they, being the provincial government, has done polling, let's see the polling. Because we have our polling, we've shared it with them, we've shared it with anybody that wants to look at it. And the numbers are pretty clear. They're very supportive. There's very few people are interested in something new. Very happy with what they want. In some cases, want some changes, and absolutely, everything can be improved. Whether we're talking about your police service or your cell phone plan, like everything can be improved. So let's have that conversation. But to get back to what you said at the beginning, to throw the baby out with the bathwater, well, that's just ridiculous. That's the equivalent of I got a cracked window on the house, so let's burn the house down and build a new house. Like, really? Why not
Yeah.
fix the window?
And we've said if if there was a legitimate case that it would improve public safety and reduce costs, we wouldn't be able to argue it. I like to think I'm a reasonable person. So show me the evidence. I don't know if you've ever followed Thomas Sowell. Do you know who he is? He's a professor out of the US, just a brilliant, brilliant man. He's a pretty conservative thinker, but I love listening to him. And he basically identifies three questions that need to be asked when you're contemplating any sort of change like this. One of which happens to be um, uh, like compared to what? Okay. So you're bringing something out. Okay. Compared to what? The second one is at what cost? And that could be either, my financial or some of these other judicial, morale, etc. And then upon what evidence are you basing this decision? And if you can satisfy all three, then you have a strong case and a strong argument. I've looked at this, and like I said, I try to be objective over it. I'm not entirely sure that any of these are satisfied in this case when you're talking about any sort of transition. Doesn't make sense to me.
Well, and that's where, you know, I feel like I have to say, and then I want to talk about the differences, because one of the other things that's been talked about is the training differences that exist between the sheriffs and like the Calgary Police Service, or the sheriffs and the RCMP. There are some quantifiable, I believe, differences that exist into the rigor of the training that I want to talk about. But as both of you gentlemen were talking about, if the government has this information, if this is all real, then they should just present the information. They should just present a good faith argument. And I think that might be where your problem is, because they don't do that.
No.
I wish they did. I sincerely, we are in some upside down level dystopian places right now, because we have a government that refuses to engage in good faith based on facts and data. In fact, we have a premier who validates the existence of chemtrails, and the fact that it makes me so sad to say that. But that's, I think, part of the problem, is that it's not a good faith conversation. It's not a good faith negotiation. It is a marketing and branding exercise being engaged in on one side by people who have already made up their decision on what the conclusion is. And when you were talking earlier about the value of an integrated policing system nationwide, my brain went, cool. So the best model would be something like AHS. What's the government's philosophy on that?
Well, I think, when you do look at Alberta Health Services or any of the other government-run stuff, are we satisfied with the way that has been run? I don't know. I can't say. And again, there are other issues that really ought to be addressed, but are being this is being used to me as a distraction. I mean, the province itself already has a ton of control. Like, when it comes down to policing, like, does anybody actually want a politician controlling policing? I would say no. We're only human. We never want that. That's why you have police boards, review boards, etc. And even when you're looking at the commanding officer of the division, they serve at the pleasure of the government. They select who's going to be there. And the same holds true for all of the detachment commanders. If you're the, I don't know, town of Sylvan Lake there, Kevin, I mean,
Great example.
yeah, mayor and city and council sit down and they interview prospective detachment commanders, and they make the selection. And it's built into the contract that if there are problems and the municipality has an issue with whoever the commander is, they list out their reasons. They send it to the CO, the commanding officer of the division, and they pull them. It has happened before.
Yep.
It is something that allows for the people to have that control. However, we don't want governments or people having control over what laws are enforced and what investigations are undertaken, or what, you know what I mean? I don't like that. I think that it has to be totally hands off and standalone. I don't like any of that stuff.
Well, I think there's a very strong argument to be made that once you have a policing apparatus that is completely under the control of a government, there start to be very real questions about accountability for that government if any criminal activity takes place. And that's not great for anything.
No.
Let's talk about if we're comparing apples to apples. What is, and I want to be clear, with the exception of the traffic tickets on the QE2 heading north, I have no beef with the sheriffs. And I want to also be very clear. Anybody who, for the most part, feels compelled to serve their society by getting involved in law enforcement for the right reasons has nothing but my respect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So preface. But when we're talking about the quality of training, I've seen some pictures. It looks like the sheriffs have some very nice gear now. But when we're talking about the training, you're only going to be as good at a thing as you're trained to be.
Yep.
What are the differences in the training between? Because Mike Ellis has stood up and he's been like, "Oh, it'll only take like 3 extra weeks or 4 extra weeks of training to get people up to the same level as CPS or the RCMP." And I'm like, I don't know. I've heard stories about Depot, but I've never been. So, both of
Yeah.
you, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, like we start by saying, the training that an RCMP officer receives is world renowned. Like the other countries come to see how it's done at Depot. It is kind of the high benchmark that most others agencies, not just in Canada but even outside of Canada, kind of aspire to. It is a world-class facility with world-class training, and any of the tier one. Police services, Edmonton, Calgary, for example, very similar stuff. Like they're very well trained, and the sheriffs, I don't want to disparage any of the sheriffs at all. I too have been stopped on Highway 2, and if the sergeant that stopped me the last time is listening, nice to see you again. They are incredibly good at what they're trained to do, and 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 it's just that simple. A tier one police officer, where we're talking about RCMP or otherwise, is it's just such a big, larger spectrum of what they're trained to be able to deal with. And there is a big gap. The suggestion that it's just a minor amount of training to bring a sheriff up to the next level. I'm like, really? Geez, I don't know. Like Jeff and I both went to Depot, for 6 months. There's a lot there to be done, and to jam that into 3 weeks. I'm not sure. Even an experienced police officer that comes over from another tier one agency, Edmonton, Calgary, and I always use those for example because they're the biggest in the province. Even one of those members that comes over to join the Mounties as an experienced police officer, well, they get 3 weeks of training. So suggest a sheriff who has had um, uh, no, I'm going to use this term broadly, police training, um, uh, to be able to bring it up to snuff at a tier one level in only 3 weeks. Eh, I find that hard to believe, and again, it's just one more thing where there is no plan, there is no clear plan, there's no clear evidence, and no costing as what that would cost to bring sheriffs up to the next level. It's
I,
it's odd.
yeah, it is odd, and I think it begs the question to achieve in that regard. Policing, even in the time that both Kevin and I have started, it is incredibly complex, and it is not just a simple matter of change the stripe on the uniform and out you go, and you're going to be able to handle whatever complex files come your way. The way and the pace of the case law, the fact that the search warrants, if you're going up on wire, you're going to be dealing with human sources. You're
Sources.
going to be doing, undercover operations. I mean, those all touch on municipal, provincial, federal areas. Like there is a lot of stuff. I mean, emergency response team, you can't just ordain someone and say, you know what, you're going to be a sniper, you're going to be the team leader, and put together, I don't know, 12 guys, and you're going to deal with this armed and barricaded now. Oh, and negotiators, you're going to be able to, like, there is a ton of complexity in that
Hmm.
regard. And with the, and I guess I would even ask myself, are the sheriffs that are currently working within the sheriffs Alberta sheriffs, are they interested in doing this? Because they could have, if they wanted to be, go the route of the RCMP or Calgary or Edmonton or whatever. Why didn't they join
Yeah.
in that case? Like, what is it we're doing? Like, you can't just suddenly, slap a stripe on them and say, you know what, you're going to be the major crimes unit, and I don't know, Northern Alberta ends up with, I don't know, 50 something murders a year. You guys are going to be tasked with investigating it. Good luck and see how that
Yeah.
turns out. Like, it's just so, it's just so complicated. And I think it misses the point, as to what it is, policing really is and does
Mhm.
in the country, let alone the province. So,
Yeah, Jeff makes a great point. Um, and again, tons of respect for the sheriffs. They extremely good at what they do and what they're trained to do. But if they wanted to do full policing, they likely already would be doing it somewhere. The nature of policing in the country, and I probably even say North America worldwide, is such that if I want to be a police officer at location X, I can reach out to location X and say, "Hi, I would like to join your police service. What's the application progress?" Everybody is hiring, and if you're qualified, you'll get snapped up. There's just no
yeah,
question about that. So to suggest that, there's it's as simple as a stroke of a pen, and hey, you're now full-fledged police officers. Really? Because had they wanted to do that, they probably would have already been doing it. No, some may be waiting for a nudge or whatever, but for those ones, hey, listen, everybody's hiring. I know the Mounties are more than happy to take them, and as would any of the other agencies. So it's it's a bit of a leap of faith that it's just that easy, because I don't think it is.
Well, I'm going to be a little bit. You guys were both very, very diplomatic with how you said what you said there. I'm going to be a little bit more blunt, because there are standards that exist for policing, and part of what the current provincial government is doing is they are in effect changing legislation to lower those standards. And I would imagine that there's probably a number of different streams that people can go through if they want to become police officers. Somebody decides they want to be a cop. So they take a job as a security guard, and then they take a job as a peace officer working in like a hospital or something, and then maybe they become a sheriff, and then maybe they become a police officer after that. I'm not saying that's the absolute stream, but I know people who have gone that pathway. And if you're not able to get through all of those layers or the appropriate layers, there's probably a good reason for that.
Possibly.
And like there are certainly well-intentioned security guards and peace officers out there who are very, very good at what they do, and I'm not diminishing that, but that does not an ERT member make, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with
That's right.
having that conversation, but for the position of the government to be okay, but we have some people who maybe aren't currently with the level of training that we're providing, which I think is important to highlight as well. They're not able to get to the level of an EPS member or a CPS member or an RCMP member, or not even going into any of the specialty teams. So we'll just lower the bar. That to me is not only a disservice to the people that those police officers will be serving, but it's also a disservice to those individuals, because if you're not prepared to go into the kind of situations that a lot of cops go into, it's going to end tragically. And this again goes back to the bit at the beginning. If we're not setting first responders of all stripes up for success to the best of our abilities, we're going to hurt them, and we're going to hurt the people that they're trying to help.
yeah, and you're absolutely correct. And I've often said, so when we would, I mean, I'm 10 years removed now from the emergency response team, but going through, like, the selection is still the same. It's still very, very high end. And I had always maintained that if we do not have any decent or good candidates this round, I say we go short. I do not want to be saddled with somebody who is not going to be necessarily up to snuff. And so the same holds true when you're looking at policing in general. I don't want to lower standards. I think that we need to, and Lord knows that the public doesn't want it, because that's all we end up seeing these days. It's more training, more standards, and because police officers are the first face of the justice system. We're the first people to get the grief from the public and the courts and the politicians and so on. We want to make sure that we put our best foot forward. If that does mean being discretionary on who we take in, then absolutely that's the case. And I think it would or could be problematic to potentially lower standards and then expect a better result from doing that. It kind of flies in the face of common sense.
Yeah, and it's and getting back to what you said there, Nate. Not everybody's cut out for this line of work. It just the fact of the matter. I know when I joined, and probably very similar to when Jeff joined, out of every 100 applicants, one maybe two, where two of those applicants cut the mustard to be suitable for the outfit. And I suspect that the other major tier one agencies were fairly similar. So just to throw the doors open and say, well, hey, no worries, but with the stroke of a pen, we can take care of that. Well, I tell you, that's one heck of a pen. Like, holy cow. It's yeah.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the judges and the courts don't care at all about any of that. There is a standard that you are required to follow, and there are certain protocols and processes. And judges, it has been our experience testifying, they are uninterested in whatever your problems are. They want to ensure that the best case is put forward and no person is unjustly convicted. That's it. Or you don't want to see bad guys going free, which is probably the more likely scenario when you're looking at any of the potential changes, because it is so incredibly complex. And that's not to say that people can't learn how to do it, but to start fresh and start just, from the ground up on something in this day and age is it's a very lofty goal.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I think it's important to also, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I know that there are, for many policing agencies that in Alberta, like, I don't know, like all 8 of them or whatever it is, there are, if you apply and you're not there yet, that's not the end of the road. There's like a deferral period where they'll say, hey, come back in a certain number of years. And if you do the work in those certain number of years to address the things that prevented you from being successful this time around, cool. Love to chat.
Yeah.
And what worries me about I'm trying to find the nicest way to say it, but I might not find it, so I'll just jump in. What worries me about opening the doors for, hey, you couldn't get on with CPS, you couldn't get on with EPS, you couldn't get on with the RCMP. The sheriffs will take just about anybody because Danielle Smith needs numbers. That scares the crap out of me.
It should,
And it should, and it should,
it
quite
should,
frankly.
and I would hope that that's not what the intention is. But as we've seen often, especially when it comes down to politically motivated projects, practicality kind of takes a back seat to the ideological success of such an idea. So yeah, it's a problem. And I've said before, Kevin is probably tired of me saying it. The things that I loved about being a police officer, honor, integrity, loyalty, facts, data, and evidence, it doesn't play well in the political world because those things are generally transactional, I guess, maybe is the best way to put it. I have a problem with that. I think it's disturbing, and I think the general public would have a problem with that. But again, the general public is not necessarily aware of what goes on even out in the open. I mean, everybody's busy, right? They got real problems to deal with, and this is what we're focusing on.
Yeah, to me, the argument that scares me the most is I have yet to see a compelling economic reason for an Alberta Provincial Police Force. I have yet to see a compelling administrative reason, and I have yet to see any sort of compelling data that suggests in any way that there would be better policing results. And so, in the absence of those things, why are we doing this? And if we're blowing up policing in the province of Alberta because the premier has a vanity project, that's not great, I don't think.
No,
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think ultimately, and we've seen this. I mean, we saw this with the firewall stuff, and then the Fair Deal panel, Alberta First, the Alberta Next, whatever it is. And it's just a constantly reoccurring thing. And I think because I see it, and all of us as Albertans probably see it, um, there is, it's not that Alberta has been put on ignore from the East or from Ottawa, but it seems to me at times that a lot of the concerns from Alberta are not taken seriously. I just don't agree that this is the proper method to go through it or to address these things. It would be nice to be able to put together a strong, united plan that works for Albertans to, you know, get our get our message across, I guess. I mean, and we'll see. I mean, I am, as I'm sure you're aware, I'm no fan of the liberal side. That's just me personally. Um, but I'm not so obtuse that I'm going to look at what's going on with Carney and suggest that he's the exact same as Trudeau. Do I, you know, I have to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's going to try and change things because I would hope that he sees the path that things are on, and you know, we Alberta's concerns need to be addressed. Well, let's figure out how to do it.
Yeah, and you're right, Nate, when it gets down to the adult, you know, like you mentioned costing or whatever, like the Fair Deal panel's own numbers, and now these are now a few years old. The government's numbers said that transition would cost $371 million at that time. It's with inflation and everything, it's way more than that. On top of that, transition costs of moving to a provincial service. There was also the loss in federal subsidy. To at that time was to the tune of $364 million, which is now probably closer to about $180 million. And other municipalities have also looked at, what would it look like to do our own police service, and they've came up with similar numbers, and that it's financially just it doesn't make sense. Red Deer, for example, they looked at it, and it was going to be just between 13 and 14 million dollars in the transition, and then another $7 million extra each year. Airdrie was that they determined it was going to be about $5 million additional every year. Olds looked at it, and it was going to be an increase, 57% in year one and 84% more by year three, and the list goes on and on. The Grand Prairie transition, it's not even done yet, and we're at 19 million there just in transition. It's not cheaper. It's not cheaper. And smart people have looked at this with eyes wide open and looked at the facts and data, and have all come to the same conclusion, or for, well, the exception of Grand Prairie, I guess, has come to the same conclusion that this is not a wise decision to move away from what we have. Some have said, "Hey, listen, we need to make some changes," which is fine. I said before, everything can be improved, but to just start over, it makes no sense.
I mean, going back to what you were saying, Jeff, about the concerns being taken seriously, as I think about Kevin's comments at the UCP AGM, if you want to have your concerns taken seriously, maybe you should have some serious concerns. Uh,
Ah,
and I think that there's plenty of legitimate grievances that Alberta has.
yes, of course.
I take nothing away from that. I'm
Hmm.
just not sure that the provincial police force or any of the things that were included in the Alberta Next panel or chemtrails are any of those serious concerns. You guys have been
Well,
very generous with your time,
yeah.
and I don't want to burn up your whole day, and I can do that very easily. So I want to just give each of you the mic. If there's anything that we haven't touched on, if there's anything else that you want people to hear, go as long as you want to, and I'm just going to get out of the way.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, thanks very much, Nate, for having us on. We appreciate, and Jeff and I can both talk about this topic for hours on end. We've toured the province, we've talked to people, everybody from the farmers down the road to the executives, and senior MLAs. We've had these conversations with people from all walks of life. We're happy to talk to anyone about it. But the but I will close with this. Our members live and work in these communities. They're your neighbors, they're your coaches, they're your first responders. The RCMP has served Alberta probably for, over 90 years, and we remain committed to serve for decades to come. And, I think that will work just fine.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. I think just building on that, it's a morale killer for the members that are serving this province. There's a lot of RCMP because Lord, Kevin and I get the messages all the time from the members. They're like, "What are you doing about like why are they doing this? Like, are we not performing? Are we not, having success with policing?" It's a problem. And keep in mind, like all of the members that do live here are still taxpayers. They're still voters. Like it's crazy that we would identify, and it's even because there's always a lot of comments that come out from the government. It's not the force, not the members. It's Ottawa. Well, Ottawa really has no real impact on the day-to-day functioning of the police. Certainly like within the Mounted Police and definitely not within any of the communities. Like it doesn't jive here. If there are issues and there are things that really need to be addressed, or perhaps there are good suggestions that we should probably look at, 2032 contract is the time to make them. Have an evidence-based approach. What is it that you're necessarily looking for? What do we want to improve? And just further to that, the issue, especially when Kevin and I are speaking with people, again, from all walks of life, the issue tends to surround the justice system itself. That is the larger problem. We need more judges. We need more court space. We need more jails, quite frankly. When we're looking at Canada, Canada has about 35,000 prisoners at a territorial, provincial, and federal level. Our population is 41 million. That's what, 0.01% of the population in jail? Not that I want to put everybody in jail, but believe me, there's a lot more people that probably ought to be in jail. When we're talking violent crime, when we're talking prolific offenders, that needs to happen. And I think that we need to again understand policing and justice system and recidivism. We will never solve it. It never will happen that way. We can only mitigate it. And the best way to mitigate it is to actually put our best foot forward, and for the province to control those things it does have control over, prosecutions, provincial jails, courtrooms, etc., and focus on that area. And you should see a trend commensurate with an increase in those numbers down when it comes down to the crime and punishment. Everybody's got to pull in the same direction. And the idea that you're going to change a police force and suddenly address all your concerns is nonsensical.
Well, and Albertans have said it loud and clear. This isn't what they want. And and this proposal from the government, this government's proposal, it's not public safety, it's politics. Just that simple.
Yeah. I appreciate you gentlemen taking the time to chat today. And I could do like I'm not even joking. I've had to start policing myself in regards to the conversations that we have, because like we just did a live show in Calgary, and I figured 3 hours, that's fine, not even close. I've got a bunch of things out in order to not pay $50 every 10 minutes for the facility after. So thank you so much. And I like really I could even just based on what you both said there, I could do another hour and a half easy.
Oh yeah, hey, no problem.
We're always happy to come back, Nate.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm gonna take you up on that offer, because
please do.
I agree, and this is we'll do before we do the final wrap up. I agree that there is a stunning lack of nuanced conversations. I agree that there are major problems in our justice system. I agree that there are major problems with how we handle the incarceration, and I would like to see a little bit more rehabilitation, if that's not too much to ask. I agree with all of those things, and those are conversations that it seems like it's getting harder and harder to have with people, because we have political actors who act in bad faith and present things in the worst possible light to score political points, as opposed to addressing what's really going on. And
well, I think the big problem when it comes down to anything along that vein is I don't think that we're serious as a country when it comes down to this stuff. We're not serious about border security, not serious about national security, not serious about national defense, not serious about crime. I don't even think we're serious about health and that stuff. So yeah, I agree with you. It's a lot of performative nonsense that's going on, and and the problem is, of course, it's hard work, takes a long time. Are we really interested in doing that? I am, but anyone else? I mean, I don't know.
I am.
Yeah, right. There we go.
I would make the argument before I let gentlemen go for like the third time.
Yeah.
I would make the argument that there's a lot of people who do want to do that work.
Yes.
The process of doing that work is being confounded by people who want to make people angry. And
Yeah.
I think that is the core problem, because the fact that you're having people come up to you guys and saying like, "Hey, this is what my issue is, and this is what I'm unhappy about." These are people are investing energy in this, but I think we have bad faith actors who would much rather redirect people's energy to making donations to political parties than to actually doing the work of meaningfully addressing these problems. So I'm definitely going to take you up. We will have another conversation.
Oh yeah, we're good with that. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for your time. Before I let you go, where can people go to learn about? I'm like 5 pages in the Keep Alberta RCMP campaign and the National Police Federation.
Oh, super easy. And that actually is the website, keepalbertarcmp.ca. There is a pile of information on there, including links to previous statements that we've sent out, as well as a spot where they can send a letter to their MLA and to the Premier to voice their concerns.
And then National Police Federation, I mean, just a Google search, you'll bring it up and you'll see what it's all about.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat today.
Excellent. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And that's it for another episode of The Breakdown. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, we would love nothing more than if you thought about signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce this kind of content. Whether you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, in which case maybe leave a review and a rating, or whether you're watching it on one of our streaming platforms, we want to say a big thank you to everybody who is part of the Breakdown's audience. And as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.